Welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show on 94.7 The Pulse. Music, interviews, news, and, well, Two Blokes Chatting. Now, here are the two blokes.
Rob, we are thrilled to introduce someone who I won't give away the name at the moment, but 211 games with Hawthorn, 8 with Subiaco. So he did play for the Lions. Coached, of course, Hawthorn, Carlton and Fitzroy for a total of 518 games of senior level stuff. He is an absolute legend of our game, is he not? Oh, hang on, why did I turn you on? There you go.
Thank you very much. He is indeed. I think I've had the pleasure of introducing this man 6 or 7 times already, and it's no less fun. Hawthorn Premiership captain, Premiership coach, 3-time Carlton Premiership coach as well, and coached Fitzroy, which we'll get on to for a little while. AFL legend, Hall of Famer, David Parkin, good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. How are you?
Very, very good. Thank you so much for coming on. You've been very good with your time for things that I've been involved in over a long journey, and I never worry about the conversation being interesting, but you've seen, I think, 70-odd grand finals consecutively, which is some sort of a record in itself, but you've probably never seen a stage of our great Australian game like it is now.
No, and it's because of this is far bigger than footy, etc., but because footy has been such a massive institution which has affected all levels of society and all elements of our life, it's a massive hit on the way that we've, at this time, what we'd be doing, what we'd be watching, what we're participating, whether you're a player or coaching, and it's had an impact like I can't remember. You might, but I can't remember, and I'm older than all of you. Anything which has impacted us in this way, and football. I've just been out walking and passing people on the beach here at Point Lonsdale, and the number of people who are making the comment about not having footy in their lives is quite fascinating. Yeah.
I think the closest, David, it's Neil, and I was talking to Mum and Dad during the week. My dad's turning 90 this year, and the two of them were teenagers who went and saw the Lions win the 1944 Premiership, and almost as old as him, and they recall the last time this sort of thing was this big was during World War II, and that's probably the only other thing that in their lifetime has come close.
Yeah, well, I can understand that. I was a kid growing up at that time and didn't see my father until I was 3, I think, and was out in a sideway, and a man arrived in an army uniform with a gun over his shoulder, and I screamed up the path. I said to Mum, there's a soldier in the driveway, and my mother took off like a Bondi tram to see Dad. But we didn't live the consequences of that, really. I mean, the aftermath of the war must struggle for Mum and Dad, but you're quite right. I can remember polio being a bit of a problem as a young kid, and parents concerned about the number of kids who suffered that terrible disease and the difficulties we had overcoming that. Took some time. So, yeah, it's something that we won't forget, something that we've still got to get through, and it's caused a total breakdown of our society as we know it.
David, your work outside football has always been working with the mind. You've done some fascinating stuff over the journey at Deakin Uni as well as working in the game. You've spent a lot of time mentoring, guiding, providing role model to many players. But as a coach at this stage, it would be a really, really tough time to deal with a list of 46 that are all in different stages of their career, and this would have a different impact on each and every one of them.
Yeah, Neil, and that list of 46, I think, is suddenly going to become probably 30. I think that'll be one of the consequences of what's happened now and the inability of the game to be able to support them. But it's fascinating. I was a bit unhappy with the response of the players initially to taking a cut. I have a son who's a recruiting officer, paid full-time employee for AFL club in South Australia, and he's now out of work in a sense and not receiving anything. So it's a massive time in terms of hit that people are going to take, and I'm not sure that our game is going to recover. We might go back to what I think was the best time in footy, when we were semi-professional and we had balance in our lives because we were all pursuing something else during the day other than their football. Now that's we've gone well past that, but we might have to rebuild the ladder of organisation in the game in the way that we did through the 70s into the 80s, and it was only at the beginning of the 90s. I think I was talking to Malcolm Blight yesterday, and we were the only two coaches at the finish who actually were working not a full-time but a part-time job other than their footy, and we're saying how good that was for us as individuals doing the roles, very complex and difficult roles that we were doing as AFL or VFL coaches in those days. So it's the consequences of what's happening now are going to be immense, and I think we're going to see a game of football. I watched, was it St Kilda
Geelong
grand final last night, and I thought that is the kind of footy that we don't see very often these days because of the density of the game and the fitness and capacities and skills. I'm amazed that the players can A, get hold of the ball, B, make a decision, and C, execute it with hand and foot to advantage. These days, when the density of the game is almost doubled, and what we had was a game that was a lot more open, and the people were trying to score and basically going forward. If you sit at home, you keep looking at the television and say, why isn't the ball going left and right of screen? Why is it going straight across all the time? So television for footy, in my humble opinion, these days is not terribly palatable. So we've got some issues. But when you're right, when you watch a game, as I did last night, I was absolutely riveted to it. I thought the quality of football, the outstanding efforts of individuals, some of the high marks were as good as I've seen in one game. There must have been a dozen, like 2 or 3 every quarter that were exceptional efforts to get into the air and grab the ball with bodies and things flying everywhere. And I thought, that is our game. That's the game that we grew up and loved, and yet I don't see that kind of football very often these days.
Well, there's one thing I saw in... I didn't see last night's game, but the game I'm referring to, David, was a premiership that may have involved a team involving a maroon and blue jumper recently. And I was watching that, and the commentators calling out every time someone came off the bench. Simon Black's come on and Nigel Lappin's come off. And I think that, to me, is indicative of part of the reason why it's so dense, because the people are coming on and off so often for a breather. In those days, it was actually an event when someone came off the bench.
Yeah, well, what would you do? I talked to Robbie about these sort of things. It's difficult. We've been reducing. I think we're getting up to 130 and 40 rotations at one stage. We've been compelled to keep it under 80 now. I think we could halve that again, which would eventually make the players fatigued and slow the game down a bit, open it up, I think, less density, and we might start to see some of the skills executed in the way that we saw in the past that we all loved and we don't see very often these days.
David, the last time I had the privilege of hearing you speak publicly, it was at the Geelong and District Football League Grand Final, and you fascinated me with your insights into player welfare at clubs and how Geelong in particular, but also Hawthorn and Sydney, had figured really, really prominently in taking care of their major assets over a long period of time. During a period like this, are those 3 clubs going to come out of this better at the other end for that simple reason?
Well, as a guess, and I'm in it from a distance now, but at a guess I would say because of what they've done prior to, what they are doing now and what they will do in the future, and one of the changes I'd have to say to that background I gave you, one of my Deakin students was doing that particular study. Geelong were the only club that were employing 3 full-time welfare people that had naught to do with the playing performance of the person or the player. I think, secondly, Hawthorn and Sydney were the clubs they were doing too. The tragedy of it, not tragedy, but the difficulty in the past is that those salaries were included in the soft cap. And it's only in the past 3 or 4 weeks, maybe a month now, that the AFL have decided that if you're looking after your players, that those salaries will not be included in the soft cap. So clubs will be more encouraged to employ people in the welfare. And the interesting thing is that over the last decade since this has come in via the AFL PA, it's the PA that's been pushing this sort of stuff, those clubs probably, I might be wrong, but Geelong, Sydney and Hawthorn have been over the last decade probably in the top 3 or 4, maybe 5 clubs in terms of on-field performance. So what we're suggesting is if we can get the players' heads, and there's another piece of research which shows this clearly, that if we can get the players' heads into something else, either into work placement, into study, into a community program, into song and dance, if you're Shane Crawford, but get your head into something else other than your football, you actually get, over a period of time, it was a 3-year study, you actually get a very consistent and above average on-field performance from those particular people. So even if you're not keen on the idea and you've got to run a program and support them with other personnel, the fact is that you're going to get a better on-field performance from your players and therefore more chance of succeeding, in my humble opinion. So some good research. The only thing the AFL haven't done, I sat on the research board for a long period of time, they do spend a lot of money, so they've been really good in trying to better the game, is that if players have been working or studying or working in programs or whatever else, doing, leading into other jobs, that in the finish you will be better off in terms of performance, and you probably will make the transition from football into non-football better. And we don't know that. We should do some research on that. The people who are prepared for life after, can they make the transition out, which has become a heck of a problem for Australian footballers, as it was and still is in American football, where 60% of American footballers are bankrupt within 10 years of finishing their careers. And I'm sure that we've got a similar sort of problem in Australian football here that we're not recognised and we're not doing something about.
And I know I've got a mate who used to be the player welfare manager for the Rugby Union Players Association of Australia, and they've done a lot of work in that area, and you never hear of rugby union players going off the rails afterwards very often, do you? You hear rugby league, yes?
That's true.
Yeah.
And they've been ahead of the curve in that, yes. Neil Craig has been working in rugby union most of the time since he's been out of football, and he says the same thing. They're much better balanced individuals, and one of the end products of that is they do make that transition better.
One thing I'd just like to throw on the table, Dave, we haven't got a lot of time left, sadly, because we could talk all day, but I noticed during the week that a couple of your old clubs have made announcements. First of all, Hawthorn have said to Box Hill that they're not going to give any players to Box Hill anymore through this season, assuming the season gets up, and now Carlton have also pulled the pin on what was the Preston Bull Ants, and unfortunately that means the Bull Ants have gone under. Do we see the start of the rebirth of AFL reserves? Do you think that's where that might go?
Yeah, because I'm fascinated, because even if they cut their lists, they go back from 48 or 46, whatever it is, to 30, the non-playing players who don't play, who are fit and available, where are they going to be placed? And how's that going to work? So that's the problem that the game has got to make decisions. I'm not smart enough to have the answers to that, but I think that's just the start of the curve, in my humble opinion, that the associated clubs, St Kilda, Melbourne, etc., have all got clubs in a similar vein. We'll see that competition sadly disappear.
David, let's take footy out of the world, because when your name pops up for we lay people, it's just footy connection, but you live a normal life like all normal people. You've had issues with health and prostate cancer, so at this particular stage a new challenge for you at the age you're at, and a lot of your friends in similar situations. How are you coping just as a citizen with what's going on at the moment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I've spent more time on the phone, and the lovely thing is that, I've got a lot of friends and associates that have been very, very good and supportive of me, and I spend a lot of time in the day, but for every phone call I make, I get one. David Whedon rang me yesterday just to check out how things were going. That sort of friendship that's lasted in footy forever. It is a strong fraternity, as you two blokes know better than anybody else. It's a powerful fraternity. I've been thinking of the three clubs, Fitzroy, Hawthorn and Carlton, and the support systems that are in place and the past players and associations, those sorts of things, will be very powerful groups, I would have thought, in helping people through what I'm finding a pretty difficult time. We're separated. My partner Gail's back home in Hawthorn, having come home from Perth in a Qantas plane that came from England via Perth. So she's been isolated for a couple of weeks too. So I'm down at Point Lonsdale, locked away and doing all the jobs I should have done around the house for the last 20 years. So trying to keep the head going. But it is a unique time, and we've seen some Australians at their worst, but I have constantly seen people being supported and helped and that sort of thing in a way that I'm delighted to call myself an Australian.
Yeah, good man. And you are one of the better ones. We wish you good health and prosperity continue. I know you said that the game of footy doesn't owe you anything. You owe it a lot for what it's presented in your life, and I think that's that typical Australian attitude that you were talking about, and we'll see more of that come to the fore in the next little while. And again, for the 7th or 8th time, I thank you so much for making yourself available to us. We really appreciate it.
My last little throw in, because Rob knows about, I'm part of what's called the Mailbag Foundation, and I can say publicly, Rob, your support of our foundation when we ride stupid postie motorbikes all over the country, trying to put transperial biopsy machines, and we put one into Geelong Hospital this last year, and very proud to be a part of that. And Rob, your support for that is very much appreciated. So thanks, guys, for having me.
Good on you, mate. All
Thanks
the very
for joining
best.
us, David. Absolute legend of the game and a really top bloke as well. I've had a bit to do with David through my involvement in junior sport as well, and he's just one of the ripping blokes of footy, isn't he?
Yeah, he is indeed. And what he alluded to there, he came to Winchelsea last year on a Bendigo Community Bank sponsored health night. Gave up his time for nothing, spent some time with the Winchelsea Football Club players and coaches as well. And as a side to that, the Community Bank chucked a couple of grand into his postie bike ride, and they raised money for machines and in country centres where people normally have to travel to Melbourne for kidney specialist treatment, but they're available now at Bendigo, Shepparton, Geelong, Ballarat now, and this little group has raised the money for that, so it's a sensational thing. Another thing that he's doing outside of footy to give back to the public, just a top bloke.